sunlight for our sustenance. In our biology class, we talk about autotrophs and heterotrophs. So autotrophs are living entities that are able to make their own food just by absorbing sunlight. These are plants. Everybody else, heterotrophs, we need to get our food from an external source. We need to eat. And what do we eat? We eat plants. So either way, we're getting our energy from the sun. And because the sun doesn't penetrate that deeply into the oceans, human scientists believed forever, basically up until about 1950, 1955, that there was nothing living in the ocean below the depth that the sun would penetrate. And that was the limit of our knowledge at the time. So after World War II, humans started to master submarine technology, and we started to be able to go deeper and deeper and deeper beneath the ocean, far below where the sun can penetrate. And of course, now we know that humans have gone to the very deepest part of the ocean. The Marianas Trench, or the Challenger Deep, is the name of the specific place in the Marianas Trench. And if you were to put Mount Everest in that trench, there would still be about a mile between the top of Mount Everest and the surface of the ocean. So that's how deep the ocean is. And the people who have gone down there, they saw all kinds of living entities. And when I say all kinds of living entities, I really mean some of the freakiest forms of living entities you can imagine. And they all huddle around the warm places. But the point is that there's life everywhere. We just don't have the eyes to see it. So the living entities that live at the bottom of the ocean, they have a body adapted to that environment. And so there are also living entities that have bodies adapted to living in air, or living in like these clouds, or even living in fire, like they're living entities in the sun, according to the verdict of the Bhagavad Gita. And in fact, the sun itself is a living entity, as is the earth, and so on and so forth. But every living entity in the material world is covered, and therefore our senses are limited. We experience this in a very practical way. For example, we were talking with our 6th graders last week about light. Anybody know the acronym for light that we can see? Roy G. Biv. Who said that? That's cheating, Sham. Anyway. Yeah, Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And the colors that we perceive are a function of the wavelength of the light that we're seeing. And so we see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. A beautiful rainbow. But that radiation, the things that are making those waves, they actually extend far in the other direction away from the red spectrum, and far in the other direction away from the violet spectrum. There's infrared light and there's ultraviolet light, and so on and so forth. But we can't see it because our senses are limited, right? We can only see in a limited spectrum. It's the same thing with our sense of hearing. We can only hear pitches within a certain frequency of wavelengths, and we can also only hear pitches at certain volumes. Like yesterday, we were doing a little science experiment, and I put a little bit of hydrochloric acid on a piece of tinfoil. And the hydrochloric acid started bubbling because it started dissolving. The tinfoil, we call it tinfoil, it's really aluminum foil, but whatever. And the hydrochloric acid started bubbling, and I'm like walking around the class showing this to everybody, see, it's bubbling, it's bubbling. And then one of the kids said, oh, I can hear it too, it's making a sound. And I'm like, what are you talking about, it's not making a sound? And they're like, no, you're crazy, it's making a sound. And I could not hear the sound because it wasn't loud enough. And so my ears are limited in this way, and their ears are not as badly damaged by loud music as mine at this point in their lives. So they're able to hear a wider volume of sounds. Some people actually can't tolerate very loud sounds. Like even sometimes I meet devotees here in this temple room that complain about, oh, the whompers are too loud, I can't take it, and they need to go outside, or they need to get earplugs to protect their hearing and whatnot. The same is true for eyesight. We see within a very limited range, but if I was an eagle flying in the sky, I would be able to see much further and much more clearly. So our senses are limited by the nature of the body that we've acquired. And even within the human form, there are different degrees or different faculties of the senses, let's say. So, I need glasses to see clearly. because my eyes are not perfect. But there are many people here who don't need glasses to see clearly. So we're all awarded different bodies in this world with all different facilities for sense perception and sense gratification. But this is all by definition limited. We cannot perceive everything. It's not possible. So our knowledge of the universe, I like to use this analogy, maybe I've used it here before. Our knowledge of the universe is asymptotic. An asymptote is a type of a graph that approaches a limit. It approaches a line, but it never actually reaches that line. The classic example of an asymptotic graph is the graph of the function y equals 1 over x. So I have a 1 and I divide it by x, and if x is super big, like if I make x as dang close to infinity as I can make it, the y value will become extremely large, and so the graph will become asymptotic on the y-axis. And if I make the x value very small, some fraction between 0 and 1, I think I got this backwards. If I make the x value very large, the y value will become very small, and the graph will approach the x-axis as an asymptote. It'll get closer and closer and closer, but it'll never get there. And the same is true if I make x very small, some number between 0 and 1. The closer it gets to 0, the bigger the y value is going to get, but it can never get to 0. You can't divide anything by 0. That's just a math principle. And so our knowledge is like this. Using our own senses, we can perceive a little bit about the material world. And there's a method for perceiving the material world. For example, some people go to the shore. You can go to St. Augustine or Cedar Key or your favorite beach here in the American Southeast. And if you look out over the water, it would appear as though the horizon is flat. And so some people look out over the horizon on the ocean or on a flat plain in Kansas or wherever, and they think, oh, the earth must be flat because I can't see the curve. But actually, these people just haven't been trained to see the curve. They don't know how to perceive properly. They don't know the scientific method of how to look or how to hear or how to smell or how to taste. There's a science behind perception. So with a little training, you can also go to the ocean, and if you watch a boat sail over the horizon, you won't see the boat just fall off the horizon as it would if the earth was in fact flat. The boat kind of gradually goes over the horizon, and you see the hull disappear first, and then you see the lower part of the mast, and then you see the higher part of the mast, and then finally the whole thing goes over the horizon. And if you go up in a lighthouse on the coast, you can actually see the boat sail further before it disappears over the horizon because you're looking over the curve of the earth. And so without any training, you can look out at the world we live in and come to a conclusion, but with a little bit of training, you can come to a different conclusion. And the point here is that because our senses are limited, we always have a tendency to get things wrong. We make mistakes all the time. That is just human nature. We are going to screw something up today, for sure, guaranteed. Because our senses are imperfect, and because our senses are imperfect, first of all, we have a tendency to be an illusion. We don't really quite understand what's going on in the world around us. And because we don't understand what's going on in the world around us, we make mistakes. So these are some of the principal defects of human life that Srila Prabhupada has mentioned. And because our senses are imperfect, and because we're subject to being an illusion, and we make mistakes, but yet we still advertise ourselves as great learned people. And that is the fourth principal defect of human life, which is called to be a cheater, to cheat people, to claim that I know something when in fact I don't know anything. I'll give you a real life example that happened not too long ago. One of our students, a few times over the last few weeks, started explaining to me how things work in the real world. And which I found to be humorous because this person is a child that has no real understanding of how things work in the real world. One could even argue that they've never spent a lot of time in the real world. The real world, by the way, is totally overrated. I spent a lot of time in the real world and I fled here. So the real world is overrated. But this is the cheating mentality, is that you think you know something and you advertise that you know this thing, but you actually don't know anything about this thing. And I don't mean to single any one person out. Actually, we are all like that. we are all possessed of a cheating mentality. And therefore we live in a society of the cheaters and the cheated, right? Sometimes we are cheating other people, other times we are getting cheated. In either circumstance, we are not actually getting what we want. And what is it that we want? The soul is actually hankering for a relationship with Krishna. But unless we can free ourselves from these coverings and become not free from the defects, but immune to the influence of the defects in our lives, we will never actually get what it is we are really looking for. And so what is that process? That is the process of bhakti yoga. But before I get into that, I just wanted to talk briefly about the nature of the coverings that we have in our life. So the most basic covering that we have is what's called, well, these coverings, they're called koshas. The word kosha in Sanskrit means like a sheath. It's something that wraps something up. And the first one is the annamaya kosha. Annamaya kosha means that we are looking for food. We want to eat, right? You cannot maintain your body without eating. And so the first thing that every living entity wants to do in this material world is eat, right? So this is called the annamaya kosha. And this is humans have this, but of all the lower types of living entities, the four-leggeds, the ones that crawl, the ones that fly, the ones that swim, the ones that are immobile, the plants, they are all looking for food. And until we get enough food in our life, we will never actually be able to advance too much further. One could debate how much food is enough food. Clearly in America, we're all overfed to one extent or another. But until that basic need is met, we can never really aspire for higher aspects of life. And the next sheath is called the pranamaya kosha. Prana is often translated as air or life force. And in this case, it's the air in our body that drives us to some